What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to my channel. Thanks for stopping by. And today I do have a full sword review for you guys of this particular sword right here. Okay, this is a historical replica put out by Universal Swords of India. And I purchased this one from Cult of Athena for $192, I believe, and then whatever the shipping cost was, so a little bit over $200 US dollars. I will put a link in the description below as to where I got it, and if you guys are interested, you can shoot over to that link and see if you can get one if you want one after seeing this review. Maybe you might not. I don't know. Anyways, here it is. And so I am personally a very big fan of military sabers, especially those of the late 18th century, all throughout the 19th century and the early 20th century, right? So the whole era in which this type of weapon was used. I own a few antique original examples. I own a couple British sabers, including an original of one of these. And I own one French example, an infantry officer's sword. And I'm currently in the process of getting a hold of another really cool sword that maybe I'll show in a later video. The whole point is I really love military sabers. It's a peak interest of mine when it comes to swords. I mean, I like all kinds of swords from all kinds of different cultures, but as it is right now, I am mostly interested in sabers. And so as a result, I did what many sword enthusiasts do. I searched the market for historical reproduction, fully functional sabers. Reproductions, you know what I mean? And it's slim pickings out there, guys. It seems that there's not really a high demand for this type of sword. I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's because so many original antiques still exist. Maybe the interest is just not there. Military saber is sort of the tail end of the tail of the sword. They're being used in the age of firearms, well into the age of firearms, and gunpowder weapons take over in that period, and edged weapons sort of take a total back seat when it comes to warfare. So maybe that's the reason why people don't have that much interest. I'm not really sure. However, I personally love them. So in my effort to try to find something that I could purchase that was a replica so that I could go out and cut with it and enjoy it, like I said, I couldn't really find anything. Let's talk about what I did find, and then we'll get into the sword review. So there's Cold Steel, right? Cold Steel makes a few different sabers in their catalog. Their most famous or most well-known example is the 1796 British Light Cavalry saber, which I actually own, which is a pretty good sword. But other than that, they really don't have too many others. I think they might have a couple U.S. examples, and I think Lynn Thompson actually designed a saber of his own design, which is kind of cool. But so there's Cold Steel, right? They have a few. There's Windlass Steelcrafts. Most of what they offer is U.S. Civil War era swords, and they don't really have that many. They're all within the budget range, so they're all less than $300. I think they're all between $150 and $250. And then the company where I got this from, Universal Swords, is also an Indian company, just like Windlass, and they have a large, extensive catalog of sabers, military sabers. I think they primarily specialize in creating reproductions. Now, once again, they're all in the budget range. There's nothing there that's really expensive. They do offer a lot of models, and currently, right now, they are the only company that offers this particular model. This is the, if I haven't already said, this is the 1845 pattern British infantry officer's sword. So this sword, or this type, this sword that this is based on, was used in the British Army from about 1845 up until like the early 1880s, I believe. If I'm wrong, someone can correct me down in the comments below, but I'm pretty sure that's right. I think they came out with a new saber in like 1882 or something like that. But this design was used for a very long time. Saw extensive service throughout Europe and in India and you know, different theaters like that. And it is a really cool sword. And if you're into sabers, you probably know of this sword because it's, you know, it's quite well known. So, this is, like I said, this is the only one I could find on the market that is a historical replica, that is functional, that you can take out and cut with and enjoy its features. You know what I mean? So, I went ahead and purchased it with my own money. And I'm not sponsored by Universal Swords or anything like that. So, just as a little disclaimer. And, yeah, I was really excited to get it. But, you know, it's within the budget range. Like I said, this was a little bit less than $200, so you can't really expect that much out of it. However, you know, that being said, I wish a manufacturer would get a hold of some original sabers and do some one-to-one reproductions. I mean, they're out there, they're available. There is an interest out there. I'm one of them. I wish that someone would do like a $400 to $500 range replica of a military saber, in particular a British one, that uses higher quality materials and, you know, is, you know, thoroughly researched and just done correctly. That being said, you know, you can probably tell where I'm going with this review, but let's get into this review, okay? Let's talk about stats, all right? Let's get the sword out of the scabbard, and we'll talk about the scabbard in a minute. Let's just focus on this sword for a minute, okay? There it is. There's the blade. It has a single edge, and then just like the originals, it has a false edge. Now, I didn't sharpen the false edge. You know, thought I would throw that out there, but usually it would be sharpened from here to about here on a historical original. And now, Windlass does not ship swords sharp. I made the mistake of not requesting the sharpening service from Cult of Athena, so I actually had to put my own edge on this, and it took a very long time. And I'm not really that good at it. But I was able to get a very nice sharp edge on this after a lot of work. So if you guys are contemplating purchasing swords out of India that are not sharpened, get a sharpening service. I'm telling you, pay for the sharpening service. It is well worth it. And if you have to, you can just hone the edge a little bit when you get it. But actually establishing a bevel and sharpening from a dull blade or dull edge is very time consuming and difficult. So just throwing that out there. All right. So this is a 32 7/8 inch blade, full measurement, which is historically accurate. And just to throw it out there, in terms of the aesthetics of this sword, the historical aesthetics, I think Universal Swords got it right. Or they did a very good job, I should say, for the sword. In terms of how it looks, okay? We'll talk about how it handles and how it cuts in a little bit. But they did a very good job. It looks the part, I have to say. Let's see. It is primarily a one-handed sword. In fact, it is a one-handed sword. You can't really get two hands on this. Most military sabers are, in fact, one-handed swords. Let me get my notes here. The steel used for this blade, okay, is what they call EN9 high carbon steel. Now, it's interesting that Universal Swords advertises this steel as high carbon because everywhere else I look, EN9 is considered mild carbon. And this steel is actually kind of soft. And once again, we'll get into that when we get into the cutting portion of the review. But it's EN9 high carbon steel. Yeah, it's got a brass guard just like the original. The handle is leather wrapped with the wire here. That is historic, this design. However, they used like this, I don't think that this is real leather. It's probably like a faux leather, although it does kind of look real. Anyway, the original examples would have had what they call shagreen or shark skin, which I believe comes from the dogfish shark, on the handle. So this leather wrap is not historical. Maybe some examples had leather, but I think for the most part, almost all of them had shark skin. It does have the typical back strap, which is actually pretty nicely done. And then, I don't know if you guys can see it. I have some other, I have some other footage that will show this guard in detail, but there's the Royal Cipher for VR, Victoria Regina, so Queen Victoria. Yeah, and there it is. So the overall weight of this thing is, let's see if I wrote it down. I think it's about a little bit over, I'm sorry, hold on, let me think for a minute. It was 1 pound, 15 ounces. So just under 2 pounds. How does that compare with the originals? Well, I can tell you, I have two 1845 infantry officers' sabers. I should have pulled them out for this video, but they are kind of put away. And both of them are lighter and more nimble than this particular example right here. This has a much thicker blade, a much heavier blade. The weight distribution of the sword is much more in the blade than the original, and it's just a heavier, beefier sword. It feels more like a cavalry saber would feel than it does an infantry officer's sword. And just to let you guys know, the originals don't feel like that. Original examples, at least the two that I have, are very nimble, very, very easily, maneuvered, and much lighter than this. I think they're about, I want to say maybe 6 to 7 ounces lighter than this sword is. That being said, it doesn't handle terribly bad. It is definitely, it does have distal taper in the blade. If you go on Cult of Athena's website, it actually lists the distal taper measurement of the blade. So it does, Universal Swords did make a good attempt at trying to control the balance of weight in this thing, because it does have a brass guard, so you would think that most of the weight would be here. And in historical examples, the weight is closer to the guard than this sword is right here. So the balance is quite far from the guard on this sword. So yeah, they didn't really quite get that right. But once again, for less than $200 or just under $200, I guess you can't really expect it to be perfect. It does have a nut construction, which the originals, for the most part, they do have this nut, although this is a threaded nut, and the originals have a nut here that is peened over it. So it has like the circle nut with a peen. This is not peened. It's just, it does kind of, it looks peened, but I'm trying to see here. It might be. Now that I'm looking at it, it actually might be peened. They actually might have gotten that right. Who knew? I actually thought it was, I believe this is threaded, but it actually does look like they attempted to peen the end too. So that's actually pretty cool. That is historical. That's actually how it's done. And it does have the, they made a really good attempt at the proof disc here. And originals did have this really nice blade etching, which, once again, they did a pretty good job on. Let's see if I can show you guys here. If you take a look here, you can see they did a pretty nice job on getting this part of the, these details correct. This is pretty much what they look like. These details actually came out pretty crisp. I was very pleased with the detail of the etching and stuff on the blade, because that's what historical examples look like. They got the crown and these intricate floral patterns here. That's exactly what the originals look like. So they did a very good job, and I was very pleased to see that they did this proved disc thing here, because that is also historically accurate. Here's the other side of the blade. just to show you guys a little bit more of the detail. This is the reverse side, or the other side, I should say. You know, once again, same amount of attention to detail there. And once again, guys, for less than 200 bucks, this attention to detail in terms of aesthetics is actually kind of impressive. I am impressed by it. This is done rather crisply. Is that a word? Crisply? I don't know. It's done nicely. Let's just put it that way. When it comes to the guard or the hilt, the brass portion is where it kind of falls apart aesthetically. The cipher there is very muddy looking or rough. Original examples are much more crisp, and you can make out way more detail there. So, you know, but other than that, other than the royal cipher, the rest of the guard actually looks pretty good, and it doesn't actually feel cheap. Compared to historical originals, it feels pretty good. It's bigger than the originals are, but it's actually rather nicely done. If they had gotten the royal cipher, which is that detailed circle piece there in the center, if they had gotten that crisper like the originals, I think that they would have absolutely, and maybe done some real shark skin on the grip, because there are many reproduction swords that have real shark skin. Looks like they chose this for a cost option, to save cost, I mean. So, but if they had done real shark skin and have gotten the royal cipher marking here in a much cleaner manner, if they had gotten this casting better, I would have to give this like an A+ in terms of aesthetics. I mean, it's nice. It's nicely done. I have to say, I can't really find that much wrong with it, other than the cipher and the shark skin. It looks good. The blade looks good. It's nice, I have to admit. You know, let's just take it does come with a steel scabbard. Just like the original, I can't really say anything bad about the scabbard. The sword does rattle around inside, but so do the originals, so it's not really that big of a deal. Overall, I think the steel scabbard looks pretty good. It's got, you know, it doesn't really have much detail on it, but neither do the originals, at least the ones that I've seen. Generally speaking, I think it's a great addition. I think they got it pretty decently correct on that as well. One thing I do have to say about the blade is originals have a much more pronounced and defined ricasso area than this sword does. You can see the ricasso here, but originals, when you hold it to the side, it's much more defined than this. And the blades they have more of a deeper hollow grind in the, I can't say hollow grind, I'm sorry. They have a much deeper fuller than the one that's on this particular sword right here. So if they had a deeper fuller on this sword, I feel like it would probably get it handling better, and it actually would look more historically accurate. But my guess is that because the steel is softer than the steel that they would have used on the originals, I think if they had ground this fuller out deeper, it might actually make the sword bend easier. So I don't know. That's just my analysis. And I sharpened the blade from the tip right down to here. As you can see my bevel. It's not the prettiest bevel in the world. Once again, I am not good at sharpening, but take my word for it, it is very sharp. Yeah, so let's go to the test cutting footage that I have, and I'll show you how this sword cuts and how it handles. Now, one thing I have to get right out there, even though I love military saber, and it's like probably at the top of my interest scale when it comes to swords, I'm not terribly adept at using a military saber. I have read some manuals, the original manuals, in particular, John Musgrave Waite and Alfred Hutton. So I am familiar with the proper techniques in terms, at least in theory. In practice, I'm not really that good. So keep that in mind when you see this test footage. I'm learning. And I have a great deal to learn about cutting with a saber. However, I was actually able to get the saber to perform and cut. So let's take a look at some of the test cutting. Here you go, guys. All pool noodle cuts. Right. And these two. Sweet. Okay guys, I didn't actually expect it to pass through this mat 100%. So I did 3 cuts on this mat, and take a look here. That is a very significant cut right there. Almost made it all the way through the mat, but you can see that it passed pretty nicely all the way through. The best cut on this thing actually pretty much went through, except for right here, as you can see. Yeah, right there. So yeah, that's a nice cut. And then there was a third cut that fell just below that large cut. Sorry, excuse me guys. And that cut was actually delivered right there. So 3 pretty good cuts. Yeah, and that's kind of what you get with this thing. Here you go. All right, let's take a look at what we got. So I did measure this sapling. It is, I use this ruler here. These pieces are about 3/4 of an inch thick of fresh wood. So if you take a look here, you can see it almost made it all the way through. A nice, even, steady cut, but it didn't make it. Still, I would say pretty devastating. If this were on flesh, that'd be pretty bad. That'd be a bad day. We'll take a look at another one here. It made pretty much halfway through, then it broke. Split the sapling. And then one more to take a look at is up here. There. Once again, halfway through, and then it snapped. This kind of struck in a knot area of the sapling, so that would have been very tough to cut anyway. However, it didn't get all the way through, but you can see there. Yeah, so there you go. I feel like this is the best cut. Yeah, not too bad. There you go. Yeah, so there you go. That was the test cutting. So when I was done doing all the cutting, I sat down and I had to sort of formulate an opinion of, how do I think this thing actually performs? And originally I was disappointed, right? I thought to myself, well, it didn't actually cut through the mats. Yeah, it did deliver some pretty deep cuts, but it didn't go all the way through like a katana would, or, excuse me, or one of my long swords would, or even one of my medieval arming swords would go through. I thought to myself, man, it's not really a good cutter, right? That was my initial impression. And it did handle okay. Like I said, the originals handle much better than this does. So I had to keep that in mind, okay? So an original example of this sword, way better handling than this. Much more nimble, much more like a real weapon, right? But this one didn't handle terribly bad. Just a little bit overweight, a little bit more cumbersome, and more of like a rod would be than a sword. But as you can see, it did actually cut. Then I had to sit down and I thought to myself, well, I can't really compare this thing to a medieval sword, and I can't compare it to, say, a katana. I can't compare it to swords in other eras during different times. I have to kind of keep this sword in context. Ooh, that's sharp. I almost cut myself. I have to keep the sword in context. So I thought to myself, well, how would the sword be used? Who would be using it? And in what context would they be using it? And we're talking about the middle of the 19th century. We're well into the gunpowder age. I mean, this is the age of firearms, the age of industrialized warfare starting to pick up. And the primary weapon is firearms, right? And the primary infantry weapon is a firearm with a bayonet on it. And so if you were an infantry officer in a European army carrying one of these, right? This would actually be a pretty good weapon to have because you're going up against people that have really long reach with bayonets. And that's the primary, I believe that, or enemy cavalry, which also has an advantage over you with reach, and they're striking down on you. So you need considerable length in your blade to parry different attacks that are going to come from either a musket with a bayonet on it, or a cavalry lance, or maybe some type of cavalry saber that's coming down on you from the top. And your other sidearm would probably have been a pistol if you were an officer. So you got a pistol in one hand, and in the other hand, something like this or this, right? And then when I put it into context, when I kind of got that in my head that, people are not wearing armor, right? It's the age of cloth uniforms. It's the age of firearms. The chances of you getting into hand-to-hand combat as an officer are not that good. As an infantry officer, maybe greater than sort of like a cavalry officer or a rear officer of higher rank. You're not going to see combat. And infantry officers did see combat, mostly in skirt. Well, we won't get into that, but they did see combat, which is why they actually were issued or required to carry swords. And when I thought about it, and I took a step back, and I put my biases out and the fact that I've used a bunch of other swords from different eras, and I thought about being an infantry officer, I had to actually admit that this would be a very formidable weapon in that context. I mean, I went a little bit further and actually looked into some first-hand accounts of people using swords like this, infantry officers, and how they were actually using them. This is Swordsman of the British Empire by D.A. Kinsley. This book was recommended by Scholar Gladiatoria, Matt Easton. Scholar Gladiatoria is his channel. I think he actually wrote the foreword in this book. But anyway, I purchased this based on his recommendation, and it's all first-hand accounts of 19th century sword war combat. And when I read through here, and I read some of the accounts, the cuts delivered by this type of sword in cavalry sabers, this is an infantry saber, were all delivered to the neck, face, head, limbs, arms, wrists, and hands. Every once in a while, a cut would be delivered to the torso, but when a soldier wanted to make an attack on the torso, they would thrust. And if you look at this sword, it's long, it's narrow, it's sharp, and I regret that I didn't do any thorough thrusting tests. I don't know why I didn't. I was obsessed with trying to figure out if this thing could cut. But when you look at this thing, it would make an extremely formidable thrusting weapon. And sure enough, most of the accounts where infantry officers or soldiers, British soldiers, struck to the center body mass, it was with thrusts. Yes, there were some cuts that came across the shoulders and stuff like that, but take my word for it, guys. This thing, if it delivered a cut to your face or your neck or your head or your wrist, those are very bad, very thorough, damaging cuts. And then I thought to myself, wow, this thing actually is a pretty decent cutter in that context. If you're using it the way it's supposed to be used, it's very effective. And in Alfred Hutton's manual of Cold Steel, this is not related to the company Cold Steel. This was the title of this book. This was written, I believe, in the late 1880s, 1889. And Alfred Hutton is one of the sort of the founding fathers of British saber, I guess, or a well-known contributor to the art of saber fencing, I should say. That's probably a better way of putting it. In this manual, he specifies the targets for your saber. And of course, they are head, neck, mostly head and face, and limbs, right? So same thing with John Musgrave Waite, another fencing manual that was put out in the 19th century, very well known. Once again, head, face, neck, hands, limbs, and thrusting to the body. Like I said, they do talk about delivering cuts to the body, but for the most part, the cuts were delivered in those areas that I talked about. And they both manuals have independent sections on defending against the bayonet on a rifle. And this type of weapon, very effective at that. So my whole point is that when you put this sword in context, even this particular one, not the historical example, but the one that I'm holding from Universal Swords, when you put this sword in its prime context, in the right context, it's a good weapon. And it's very effective. And I would not want to be on the receiving end of this sword. I'm telling you right now. Definitely not. The cuts that I've seen this thing deliver, you don't want that. So, the overall design of this sword, in terms of an effective fighting weapon, pretty damn good. And I was actually quite impressed. Originally disappointed, but when I put it in context, which I should do more often when I do my sword reviews, very, very good. Now, this sword in terms of quality, fit, and finish, not so good, okay? Let me just show you something. After delivering those cuts against those targets where I didn't actually go through them, like the branch and the mats, there was some blade bending. So if you take a look here, you can see, hopefully you can see that the blade is bent. Historical examples would bend too, I guess, but maybe not from the stress that I put this thing under. I don't think I did that much abusive testing. But there is a bend to the blade, both down at the bottom, and there's another one at the top that you probably can't see too good from here, but it is bent. It is a soft steel. This EN9 carbon steel, not very good. I wish they had used something like 1060 or 1065 or 1095. That would have been way better than this. I assume that would have made it more expensive, but I think it would have been worth it to get a tougher blade. The edge retention, though, is pretty good. After all that cutting, this sword is still very sharp, and I assume it would pass through a water bottle or even one of the tougher water bottles, no problem. So yeah, Not pleased with the bending. And I don't know if you can actually see here. I'll try to show it. But the blade, you can't really see it. See the gap in here? The blade actually did shift like this. Not too much, and it looks like you could probably fix it. But it did shift in the guard, so that gap is too wide. Yeah, and the blade just, the bending really disappointed me because, like I said, it didn't really put it through that much stress. But, you know, evidently too much for this type of steel. I'm not a fan of this EN9 steel. I've had another sword that had the same issues. It was whippy, it didn't cut very well, and it bent. So, not a fan of that. So, overall analysis. Do I recommend this sword? Well, if you're going to do a light water bottle cutting, yeah. If that's all you want to do, yes. If you want it as a wall hanger, it's great. I mean, it has all the aesthetics of the historical sword. But if you're intending to put this thing through some really good testing and really want something closer to the original, nah, man, this is not the choice. And I wish Universal Swords would watch this video and listen to me and get better on the detail, get rid of this EN9 steel, get more accurate blade profile. This is not the exact profile of the original, and as a result, it doesn't handle like the original. It's heavier and cumbersome. If they got better detail, changed up the steel to a more durable steel, used real shark skin, man, I would pay more than $200 for this sword. I'd probably pay up in the $300 to $400 range if they did it appropriately. And that's the message that I want to get across for this sword. It's okay, but it's definitely not like the original. I have originals, and they are not like this in terms of handling and detail. But this is the closest thing you're going to get to a reproduction on the market, guys, right now that's available. In fact, this is the only sword on the market. This is the only 1845 infantry officers, British infantry officers sword on the market. Overall, I think Universal Swords did pretty good, but it needs better attention to detail and much better quality materials used in order to make it, well, at least get a recommendation from my behalf. If you don't care about that, then whatever. But like I said, makes a good wall hanger. It's kind of expensive for a wall hanger. And if you want to take it out and do some light cutting, you can do with it. You can do it. Just keep in mind, it doesn't handle like the original does. And an original is better, way better than this is. So, yeah, that's my review of the sword. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know this one was a little bit longer than my others. There was kind of a lot to cover. Once again, I really wish someone would make a higher quality infantry officer's saber from the 19th century and do it correctly. Until then, we just have to keep looking and keep hoping, guys, for you guys that really want one. I know I do. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe if you like this channel. Like it if you like this video. Leave some comments down below. I love having discussions with people about swords. Thank you very much. Yeah, look forward to putting up some other videos, and have a nice day, guys. See ya.